and video. It is my pleasure to introduce the two speakers today. First of all, Noëlle DePape currently leads the community development branch at the City of Winnipeg. Noëlle has spent her career working both locally and globally for equitable, inclusive, and just communities. Whether in her current role in municipal government or her previous leadership roles in community-based organizations, such as ERCOM and Social Planning Council, Noëlle takes a community development and collaborative approach to working for social change. Noëlle holds a master's degree in peace building from the University of Queensland, Australia, where she was a Rotary World Peace Fellow. She was also a recipient of the YWCA Woman of Distinction Award. Our second speaker will be Aron Skworchinski. She is Métis woman from Winnipeg, located in Treaty 1 territory at the heart of the national homeland of the Red River. She currently works in the Community Development Division of Community Services at Winnipeg in the role of social projects and initiatives and poverty reduction. Her work is focused on the development of the city's poverty reduction strategy. Rooted in Indigenous ways of being, knowing, and doing, Aron is very passionate about all well-being of the future of the community she lives in and works in. She graduated from the University of Manitoba with a Bachelor of Social Work in 2019 and has provided her with a professional foundation built on promoting social justice and human rights. She currently serves as the Buffalo Circle Coordinator for Indigenous Helpers Society, Inc., a self-sustaining grassroots organization directed to the wellness of Indigenous peoples. We will be screen sharing a PowerPoint presentation for the presentation and then open to questions. Noëlle.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. I wrote in the chat, so many of my favorite Rotarians are on this call. What a great group you have. And it sounds like you're growing with new members, so that's really exciting. I'm always so happy to be here to speak to Rotary. As Ernie mentioned, I'm forever grateful for the investment that the Rotary Foundation put into me to become a Rotary Peace Fellow. And it's great to continue to do this work in kind of a local context. Although I was saying to my partner the other day that I think shaking up municipal government might actually be almost as hard as trying to build peace in the Middle East. I don't know. I'll leave that with you. Anyways, Aron is going to screen share our presentation, and we wanted to share a little bit about the work that we do at the City of Winnipeg through the Community Development Division, and then focus on the poverty reduction strategy so that you have a sense of what that strategy looks like and some of our early successes. And then we'd love to hear your questions and have a discussion. So the presentation is called Honoring Our Sacred Wisdom, the Winnipeg Poverty Reduction Strategy 2021 to 2031. So this is a 10-year strategy, and it's the City of Winnipeg's first ever poverty reduction strategy. Next slide, please. So we did a land acknowledgement, but it's always good to do another one. So we gratefully acknowledge that we work and reside in Treaty Number 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and then a national homeland of the Red River Métis. That's our newest rendition of the treaty land acknowledgement, adding that Red River Métis piece. Our clean drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty Number 3 territory. So most of you know me, but there's a few new faces around the table. So as you mentioned, I'm a Rotary World Peace Fellow alumni. I was in class 2 at the University of Queensland for a long time ago before I had my kids, but it's I still remember it fondly. In that picture is me and Abdikar Ahmed, who is one of my partners in crime for a long time, and he also was a Peace Fellow. And I'm happy to report that Nadia Mahmoud, who's one of my best friends working in Solomon Islands, who's a Peace Fellow from Winnipeg as well, is going to be coming home for a visit in March. So maybe you can pull her in to present at one of your club meetings about her work with the World Bank in Solomon Islands. I worked overseas doing peace building work in my early career in a Palestinian refugee camp in South Asia, India, and Pakistan, and in the Balkans. As mentioned in my bio, I was the previous executive director at EARCOM, and also worked as a community activist and advocate with the Social Planning Council and Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. And I joined the city of Winnipeg 2 years ago. So it's still fairly new, but I'm starting to get the groove of working within a system, which was very new for me coming from community. Next slide, Aron.
Thanks, Noëlle. So yeah, a little bit about me. My name is Aron Skworchinski. As mentioned in my bio, I graduated in 2019 with a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Manitoba. And then I started as an intern with the Indigenous Relations Division at the City of Winnipeg through Oshké and Anishinaabe-Naganiwak, which is the City of Winnipeg's Indigenous Youth Strategy. I'm currently on the board of the Indigenous Helpers Society, and I've been with the Community Development Division working with Noëlle since late 2020, assisting in the development of the poverty reduction strategy.
So just a little bit about where we're situated in the city. So we're part of a small but mighty team called the Community Development Division. And this division actually only started 2 years ago. And essentially, our mission is to use a community development approach that's proactive and responsive to work collaboratively with all community members to cultivate a safe, healthy, inclusive, diverse, and equitable city where everyone is cared for and can flourish. And a lot of the projects we've been working on have been major city social strategies. So when I first got into the division, we were working on the Newcomer Welcome and Inclusion Strategy. We had a very successful anti-racism week that many Rotarians participated in and held activities for last year. And then we worked on the poverty reduction strategy this year. So we have sort of 5 different areas in the community development branch. Our grants administration, where we provide grants to over 30 different community-based organizations. Our frontline community development, where we're trying to bring community voice into the city and help community organizations to navigate our systems. Crisis response, where we're actually going out to respond when there's fires and there's people who are displaced. We have an emergency social services team made up of social workers and crisis workers that goes out to respond, often in the middle of the night. And we've had a lot of fires going on in the last while, so that's been busy. And then our social policy branch, which, as I mentioned, is developing a number of social justice related policies for the city. Next slide. So this is our CD team at work. We're a very diverse team, very energetic. You can see in the corner, Galolcha Boru, who I believe presented to you last year. He's part of our team, and he's at RAY delivering blankets during COVID. We have Sylvia Boudreau, who's doing a training on meth 101, so teaching people about how to support those who are under the influence of drugs, in particular using meth. We have Leslie Richards in the bottom, who's handing over the keys of an old rec center to Mumaway so they can bring in their food distribution site in Elmwood. We had a chance to do a walk with the Bear Clan in the North End. And then at the bottom, we're there with Mayor Bowman and a number of other city staff and community partners when we celebrated the approval of the Newcomer Welcome and Inclusion Strategy. So we dabble in many different projects, but we just wanted to give you a sense of a little bit of the work that we do within our division. And now we're going to jump into the poverty reduction strategy. So poverty in Winnipeg, 1 in 8 Winnipeggers, so 13% of Winnipeggers live in poverty or under the poverty line. 1 in 4 of those who live in poverty are Indigenous residents. 1 in 4 are newcomers. So those are people who have come to Canada in the last 5 years. And almost 1 in 5 are children, which is double the national average. So if you look at the dark blue areas on this map, those are sort of areas of high poverty where there's higher concentrations of poverty. And while most of them are in the downtown core and in the North End, there's also pockets of poverty in other neighborhoods, especially around some of the social housing, Manitoba housing blocks. So 44% of all residents are living in poverty in those areas, and 61% of all children and 61% of all Indigenous residents in those high poverty concentration areas are living in poverty. So as you can see, and as I'm sure you're very familiar with, there's a lot of challenges that we have in the city of Winnipeg, and there's a lot of barriers for low-income residents to really get out of that cycle of poverty. Next slide, please. Over to you, Aron.
Thanks, Noëlle. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Winnipeg Poverty Reduction Strategy itself. So on November 25th of 2021, the first ever poverty reduction strategy was adopted by City Council. And so the picture here shows the beautiful cover art of the Winnipeg Poverty Reduction Strategy report. In the report includes the strategy's vision and mission, as well as the guiding principles of the strategy, as well as the two life poles or the focus areas, which are affordable housing and Indigenous children, youth, and families. And so there's also the 8 goal areas and 10-year objectives that are for each of the 8 goal areas, as well as the implementation plans that are going to be scheduled with multi-year budgets that the city has. So I'll talk a little bit more about these pieces in the next slide, a few slides here. So a bit about the background on the approach of how we created the strategy. We know that the city cannot end poverty alone, and so partnerships and collaborations with other governments, including the provincial, federal, and Indigenous governments, as well as the community, are critical throughout the development and as we go forward through implementing the strategy. In the development, we co-created it with the community, specifically with experts on poverty in Winnipeg. And we did extensive stakeholder engagement. So we had 3 phases with over 230 participants in 20 various engagement sessions. Majority of those sessions, I think nearly all of them, were virtual sessions with special focus on engagements with lived experience voices. So people with lived experience of poverty, Indigenous youth, community organizations, and leaders. And we also did engagement with the various levels of government and rights holder engagements to build relationships for ongoing collaboration and partnerships. So here we have a graphic, and this really demonstrates the strategy's framework. We had an Indigenous youth graphic artist, create this graphic for us. And so we have the strategy's overarching principle at the top, which is that we will honor our shared wisdom, accept responsibility, and be accountable for implementing the strategy. And so this was, inspiration was drawn from Amik, the beaver, from the 7 sacred teachings that represents wisdom. And so that, as Noëlle mentioned in the beginning, our shared wisdom, the name for the strategy, that's where that comes from. And then we have our guiding principles. So those are in the arrows that are going in a circular fashion there, so that we will uphold human rights, we will honor relationships and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, we will address systemic oppression, trauma, and social inequity, we will promote and maintain the welfare of all residents, and we will develop trust and meaningful partnerships to find solutions and drive change. So those are our guiding principles. And then within there, we have our 8 goal areas. So on this slide here, it's just a little bit easier to read the 8 goal areas for the strategy. So we have the strategy implementation and systems change, affordable housing, employment and income opportunities, community well-being, transportation equity, equity in city services, food security, and community safety. And then as you can see in this graphic, affordable housing is in the center, represented by the teepee. And then we also have in the center of the graphic, Indigenous children, youth, and families. So as I had mentioned a little earlier, there's the 2 life poles of the strategy. And so across the 8 goals of the poverty reduction strategy, these are the 2 key focus areas that were identified and prioritized by stakeholders for enhanced and focused support to impact the cycle of poverty. So that being Indigenous children, youth, and families, and affordable housing. And the term life pole is derived from the teachings of the teepee, and this pole is the final one to be raised and has the critical role of supporting the canvas, and because of that, represents ultimate protection. And so now I just have a bit more background information on the rationale of the 2 life poles. So the first being affordable housing. So in 2020, the City of Winnipeg did a comprehensive housing needs assessment with various findings. So it was found that over 60,000 households in Winnipeg face affordability challenges, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Households in core housing need has increased by 25% since 2011 in Winnipeg, related to adequacy, affordability, and suitability. Many stakeholders reported a challenge in moving up the housing continuum, so due to limited supply, especially lower income housing options. And significant investments are being made by the federal governments into housing, including the National Housing Strategy, which requires municipal level support to leverage. So having this be a focus area for the city is vital. And then we have our other life pole, Indigenous children, youth, and families. So as we know, Winnipeg is located in Treaty Number 1 and the Métis homeland. The city has a focus and committed to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, as well as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls calls for justice. And the city of Winnipeg also has the Winnipeg Indigenous Accord. So some statistics related to Indigenous children, youth, and families are that 66% of people experiencing homelessness in Winnipeg are Indigenous. 68% of youth experiencing homelessness have spent time in the care of child and family services. And 87% of children currently in care are Indigenous. And then also approximately 500 youth age out of care every year in Manitoba, where they are largely unprepared for adult life with experiencing either incomplete high school education, not a lot of employment experience, lacking life skills for independent living. And so a lot of this has been what's inspired the need for having this to be a focus area for Winnipeg's poverty reduction strategy. And then we have here another graphic. It's showing the strategy's framework. So the pieces I've talked about up until this point have been really the foundation of that 10-year strategy, including the vision and mission, what the city's role is, and those goals and objectives, and that those are going to guide the city for the next 10 years. And as we continue to build onto that, we're going to be using implementation plans based in actions around equity, as well as a culture of caring. And those will be aligned with the city's multi-year budgets. So our first implementation plan or action plan is beginning the fall of 2021 into the spring of 2023. So we have priority actions for the next 18 months to begin implementation of the strategy. We have 80 actions overall that are all within existing resources that the city has. And the next implementation plan is to be tabled in spring of 2023 for consideration in the next multi-year budget. So from 2024 to 2027. And so I'm just going to pass it over back to Noëlle now to talk a little bit more about the current support for the strategy.
Great, thank you, Aron. And I'll also just mention that a lot of the vision for the Indigenous worldview for this strategy actually came from Aron. And at the time when she first started with the poverty reduction strategy, she was in an internship through Indigenous Relations Division. And we quickly hired her up because she's definitely an up-and-comer. But it's really important, I think, that we make sure we work with our Indigenous neighbors and ensure that those views are embedded in our work, not just sort of as an afterthought, but really embedded in the foundation of these types of civic strategies. So I just wanted to point that out, Aron. In terms of support for the strategy, so it was adopted by Council in November, December 2021, which was very excited. And there was actually some funds that were allocated towards the strategy. There was 2.7 million advocated over 2 years. And as I'm sure you're aware, the city is in financial challenging spot at the moment. So the fact that we were able to get some funding toward the strategy really demonstrated that the city was prioritizing the need for poverty reduction and for the city to play an active role in poverty reduction. So we were able to fund 2 temporary staff to support rapid housing initiatives and more so to help facilitate affordable housing within the city. Also, there was $250,000 a year over 2 years towards the Indigenous Youth Strategy funding, some funds towards some permanent public washrooms that we'll talk about in a minute, and then also funds for mobile outreach support services to some of the organizations that work with unsheltered citizens. So we were very happy to have that. And there's also one more piece where in all of our administrative reports, so those are the reports that the public service brings to council, there's actually a question at the end of each report now that needs to align with the poverty reduction strategy. So that was also very exciting because really what we're trying to do is ensure that the poverty reduction strategy, a poverty reduction lens, equity lens is embedded in our system. And as you know, with big systems, that can be really challenging to do. So we are looking at different ways to ensure that the poverty reduction strategy really is considered in decision-making across the board at the city. So that's one way that we've added that piece in. Okay, so we just wanted to share a few successes that we've had kind of early on with the poverty reduction strategy. So poverty reduction in action. One is around some of the public washrooms that are currently being built. If you ever drive down Main Street, right beside Thunderbird House, you'll probably see 2 shipping containers stacked on top of each other. We were able to work and engage with a number of community partners, including Thunderbird House in Mama Wichita, around the design. I saw that Wins Bridgman is going to be presenting at your next Rotary Club meeting, and so he was the designer, and I'm sure he'll tell you much more in depth about this project and others that he's working on. But this is located on Thunderbird House grounds, and it's right next door to Astum Api Nikanak, which is the tiny village project that Mumaway is leading. So it's well situated in an area where there are a number of unsheltered people. And this is planned to be open in spring 2022, so just a few months away, and will be the city's first public washroom, I think, in decades. We're also looking at a peer support staff model where community organizations will staff the site using a harm reduction approach. So we see this as a real win in terms of, making sure that we're not just writing a document that sits on a shelf, but actually coming up with tangible projects that are going to support low-income people. Next slide, please. The next one is around affordable housing. So we've been really lucky to work directly with the federal government around 2 streams of the Rapid Housing Initiative. So the city got in round 1, 12.5 million from the feds, and in round 2, 12.8 million from the feds to support a number of community-based projects that are developing new affordable housing. And the target groups for this housing are people experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness, with some more specific target groups around Indigenous women and girls, newcomers. So some of the partners that received funding were the West Central Women's Resource Center. They have a great project on Toronto Street, Siloam Mission, Salvation Army, and Shawewin Abinuj Inc. So that's SAI. And actually that's a rendition by, again, Bridgman Collaborative of what kind of the new upgraded building is going to look like. I believe it's on Alfred Street in North Point Douglas. And that's specifically going to be a facility for youth aging out of care or families who aren't able to get youth back into their family because they don't have secure housing. So it's also going to support families who are trying to bring kids back into their home from care. So there's some really exciting projects that have been able to be supported through this partnership with the federal government and the municipality. And we hope that we can leverage further funding in the future. Next slide, please. The last poverty reduction in action slide is around the Oshki Anishinaabe Nikawak Indigenous Youth Strategy. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but OAN received some additional funding for the next couple of years, basically to continue to work with a number of community partners who support Indigenous youth on the front line. So their mission is to give Indigenous youth positive opportunities in the community and civic system by bridging and providing culturally appropriate programs and supports related to employment, literacy, and recreation to increase resiliency, self-sustainability, pride, and future opportunities. So this is a really powerful program, and we're so excited to see some additional funding go into that project. Next slide, please. So that's the end of our presentation. We just wanted to mention, as you know, with Rotary Service Above Self, already you're working to support and care for our most vulnerable community members. And really, we know that caring for our most vulnerable residents makes the city better for everyone. So some of the questions we continue to ask is, what kind of city do we want to be? And how can we really take care of each other? The picture here is actually during the pandemic, a number of city staff, because libraries and rec centers were being closed down, were going to be laid off. And we were able to come up with a really creative strategy to keep some of those staff to support Winnipeg Harvest. So about 30 librarians and rec techs actually went to Harvest and worked for a number of months for free for Harvest, and were able to continue to get paid. And that was sort of one of our contributions at the city to try and support vulnerable Winnipeggers during a really hard time during the pandemic. And then I guess the next question is, how can Rotary continue to lead by example to support our most vulnerable residents? And we heard about a number of different projects that you're already working on. And I think your club is often a front runner in the city and even across Canada with some really important and creative local projects. So I guess keep up the good work and always continue to look for different opportunities to partner and continue to support those from marginalized communities. So I'll end there, and then Aron and I would be happy to take any questions or feedback from the group.